Hey guys, tonight we step quietly into a world where every glance, every gesture, every pause means something. You're standing outside a grand Persian noble's residence. No doorbell, no buzzer, not even a door knocker. Just a carved wooden gate and a choice. Do you dare call out, or do you wait and hope they already know you're here? The sandstone wall before you glows warm in the late afternoon light. Behind it, you can just make out the faint murmur of water and the rustle of mulberry trees. The smell of cardamom and dust hangs in the air. The silence feels deliberate, heavy, almost sacred. You shift your weight, trying not to scuff the heel of your sandal. You've been told, never knock on the gate of a Persian noble. It's impolite, an act that suggests impatience. Instead, proper etiquette says you should simply stand and wait like a pebble in the current. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere far off, let me know your city and local time in the comments. I love seeing how far these sleepy journeys travel. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You lean slightly against the gatepost, still not daring to touch it. Someone told you once that it's best to clear your throat softly just once, no more. Another said nobles often position a servant discreetly behind a lattice, someone who watches visitors arrive and reports them before they speak. A mainstream fact by the late medieval period, especially in Safavid Persia. It was customary for nobles to discourage direct approaches to their homes. Etiquette demanded patience and deference, especially from lower-ranking visitors or those without formal invitations. Privacy and ritual protocol weren't just courtesies, they were strategies for asserting power. You glance again at the finely carved surface of the gate. Interlocking arabesques twist across its surface like vines. You notice a small brass ring, not a knocker, more of a signal for servants. But even that feels off-limits. Here's a quirky tidbit: in some noble estates, the gate was intentionally designed to creak a little when opened, just enough to alert servants inside, without the guest having to say a word. An accidental squeak becomes a formal announcement, a kind of acoustic doorbell, centuries before electricity. You hear a rustle from within. The heavy door shifts just an inch. Then it stops. Someone is watching. You resist the urge to call out. That would mark you as unschooled in etiquette. Instead, you step back a half-pace, lower your eyes, and wait. Minutes pass. Then almost imperceptibly, the door swings open. A young doorkeeper, neatly dressed in a cotton robe dyed deep indigo, steps out and greets you without smiling. He doesn't ask your name. He already knows. He gives you a once-over, not hostile, just thorough. Your shoes, your belt, the embroidery on your sleeves. In Persian noble etiquette, first impressions are never casual. Be welcomed, he says, finally stepping aside and gesturing with one hand. You incline your head, not a bow, not a nod, something in between, and step into the shaded vestibule. Historians still argue whether visitors were trained in this etiquette formally or if it was passed down informally through observation. Some manuals on courtly behavior exist, but they're filled with poetic abstractions and don't explain the moment-to-moment choices that visitors had to make. You wonder how many hopeful merchants or minor poets fumbled this first step and were turned away before they ever met the noble. Inside, the air is cooler. You are not yet in the house. You are in the liminal space, the between. This vestibule is deliberate. It slows you down, stills your heart. Your feet sink slightly into a woven rug. A curtain stirs at the far end of the hallway. A bell rings somewhere above. You've passed the first test. Now the visit begins. You move forward, but not of your own accord. The doorkeeper gestures silently, and your feet obey. Each step is measured. The sound of your sandals, muffled by the thick carpet beneath, hand-woven and patterned in deep pomegranate and midnight blue. You pass under a pointed arch, its curves whispering reminders that this is no mere house. This is theater. This is diplomacy. And you are the actor who hasn't read the full script. Just ahead, another servant, older, with a thin gray beard and sharper eyes, emerges from behind a screen. He is the chamberlain. You're not important enough to meet the noble yet. First, this man will decide what version of you the household receives. The chamberlain inspects you with the precision of a jeweler studying a flawed gem. His gaze lingers just long enough on your belt clasp, your cuffs, the angle of your bow, and then he speaks, not to you, but to the doorkeeper behind you. A guest with clean shoes and unsure shoulders. You freeze. What does that mean? He turns his eyes toward yours and speaks softly. You carry your fear well. That's something. A mainstream fact. In elite Safavid homes, gatekeepers and chamberlains often served as gatekeepers of more than just doors. They were trained in social reading with an eye for subtle gestures, posture, and vocal tone. A raised eyebrow or shift in stance could say more than any letter of introduction. You attempt to recover with a half smile, one that suggests deference without submission. It probably doesn't work. The chamberlain steps aside and beckons you forward. Your host is finishing his ablutions, he murmurs. You will wait in the outer Iwan. Ah, the Iwan, a vaulted open hall facing the inner courtyard. You've read of them. Cool in summer, framed with tiled walls, a blend of architectural utility and philosophical statement. The Persian garden ethos extends into the home order in geometry, serenity in light. But before you reach it, you must pass the inner vestibule, the true psychological barrier. Here, the chamberlain stops you with a raised palm. He reaches into a small, lacquered box beside the threshold and pulls out a tiny cloth sachet. Without a word, he offers it to you. You take it and understand immediately a scented token, a blend of dried mint, crushed myrtle leaves, and a trace of rose. You raise it briefly to your nose. It's not a gift. It's not for comfort. It's a test. Quirky detail in some elite homes, sachets like this were perfumed with herbs specifically chosen for their ability to reveal illness or emotional agitation. If you flinch or cough or react strangely, it might be noted, filed away as a marker of your unworthiness. You manage a slow inhale. Your nostrils sting slightly, but you keep your face neutral. The chamberlain watches for a flicker of discomfort. When he sees none, he nods barely. The scent was also, of course, symbolic. Breath control restraint, a reminder to compose your body before entering another's sanctum. Historians still argue whether the use of such sachets had a genuine diagnostic purpose or were simply one more layer in the long choreography of power. Some claim they had roots in Sufi ritual. Others see them as social camouflage for a subtle form of vetting. You follow him now into the Iwan. Light blooms. The hall opens onto a tiled courtyard, its center dominated by a still rectangular pool ringed with orange trees in earthenware pots. A lattice of shade falls across the marble floor, dappled like leopard skin. You stand where instructed. Silence returns, punctuated only by the ripple of the water. In front of you, a carpeted bench set against the mosaic wall awaits, but you are not told to sit yet. You remain standing. A joke forms unbidden in your tired mind. If posture were power, Persian chamberlains would rule empires. And perhaps they do. You're still standing. The chamberlain has vanished, again silent as smoke, leaving you alone in the Iwan. Not alone. This space is never truly empty. Someone is watching. Perhaps from behind one of the mashrabiyah screens, their eyes framed by cedarwood lattice, trained to catch the flutter of impatience or pride on a guest's face. Best not to look up too much, too confident. But don't lower your eyes either. That's submission. You settle for the age-old technique of the polite gaze, focused just ahead, on nothing in particular, as though admiring the pool without really seeing it. The water is impossibly still. It's not just decorative. You know this. In Persian architecture, the courtyard pool reflects the sky, a mirror for heaven. Symbolic, sure, but also functional. Evaporative, cooling, ambient humidity. The engineers of paradise weren't playing around. Mainstream fact, Persian homes of the upper classes were designed with microclimates in mind. The Iwan and the courtyard work together to cool the home, using geometry, airflow, and water. It wasn't just a luxury, it was survival in arid climates. Some even say the Persian courtyard was the ancient air conditioner. There's movement behind the far curtain. You pretend not to notice. The servant returns. Not the chamberlain this time, but someone younger, holding a tray with 2 objects, a small porcelain cup of tea, and a folded napkin embroidered with what looks like pomegranate blossoms. The tea is placed on a low stool beside you. No words, no nod, just the clink of porcelain and footsteps vanishing once again into shadow. You know better than to drink. Yet, this is a moment of courtship. You wonder, is the host testing your patience again, your manners, your resistance to temptation? Quirky tidbit in some Persian noble households, the guest's first sip of tea would not be from the offered cup at all, but from a second, freshly prepared one, brought only after the host appeared. The first cup, a decoy, a placeholder, a vessel for time. You wait and wait. Your knees are beginning to protest, but you ignore them. You imagine how many visitors have stood exactly where you are now. Ambassadors, merchants, poets, hoping for patronage. Did they fidget, speak too soon, misinterpret the silence as neglect rather than respect? Historians still argue whether the silence was a tactical device or simply tradition calcified into ritual. Some accounts suggest hosts would delay their entrance deliberately to allow the guest to feel their own insignificance before receiving acknowledgement. Footsteps, this time heavier. Your spine straightens. He arrives not through the center arch, but from the left, as etiquette demands. Always the left for hosts, the right for guests. Symbolism, maybe, or just habit hardened into law. The nobleman is not young. His beard is carefully oiled, his robe a deep green with gold thread cuffs. You spot a ring on his index finger, lapis lazuli polished to a dull sheen. The ring catches the light, but not enough to dazzle. He wants you to notice it, but not stare. He doesn't smile, but he does speak. You were patient. I appreciate that. His voice is low and dry, the kind of voice that has weighed too many opinions. You bow not a full bend, just enough. He gestures to the bench across from him, now suddenly available. You sit, slowly. Tell me, he says, do you find our city too dusty? Ah, a test. You answer carefully, something about how the dust holds the memory of the mountains. He nods, as if you've passed, though you're not sure what the correct answer was. He picks up the cup of tea, yours, and hands it to you. Only now do you sip. It is warm, faintly bitter, laced with cinnamon bark, and suddenly your body unclenches. You've made it through the gates, but the visit is just beginning. The tea loosens your jaw just enough to allow a breath that doesn't tremble. You cradle the cup like a talisman, its warmth seeping into your palms. Across from you, the noble reclines not lazily, but like someone who knows his role in the drama of power. He does not sip his own tea. He watches. A moment passes, another, and then the inevitable question. So, he says, swirling invisible thoughts in the silence, what brought you here? You were ready for this, weren't you? The practiced answer, a mix of gratitude, deference, and just enough ambition to make you worth remembering. You say the words, you say them well, and he listens, not just hears, but listens. That's the unnerving part, because his gaze does not wander. His fingers do not fidget. This is a man trained in the etiquette of stillness, an art more difficult than any sword play. Mainstream fact, in Persian elite circles, mastery of silence and stillness was a mark of refinement. Conversation was not a constant river, but a garden of pauses, each space between words as cultivated as the words themselves. They called it adab properness, but it ran deeper than politeness. It was structure. It was a social script written in breath. He responds with a nod, but no comment. Instead, he shifts the conversation not through words, but through gesture. He snaps his fingers once. A boy no older than 10 appears through a side curtain, carrying a wooden tray of small sweets and dried fruits, figs, walnuts, glazed in rose syrup, something that might be candied melon. He kneels to offer it to you first. Here it is again, a ritual wrapped in hospitality. You choose just one, no more. Take two, and it's gluttony. Take none, and it's insult. You opt for a single fig, dried, sweet, and safe. He approves. You can feel it, though his face betrays nothing. Quirky tidbit. In some regions of Persia, the placement of specific sweets signaled subtle intentions. A pomegranate sweet meant the host sought information. A dried date hinted at respect for religious learning, while sugared pistachios could suggest alliance or favor. Whether guests understood these cues varied wildly, of course. You chew slowly, and then the conversation begins to deepen. Tell me, he says, how is your city's water these days? A strange question, unless you remember that in Persia, water is never just water. It is power. It is purity. It is politics. You offer a careful reply. Something about spring-fed canals, about seasonal shortages, about the wisdom of building underground qanats, those long sloped tunnels the Persians engineered centuries ago to carry cool water across blistering plains. He listens, lips tightening slightly, then nods. You know more than you pretend, he says. That is a strength, if you use it wisely. You nod, but say nothing. It's better this way. Historians still argue whether the Persian etiquette of such visits was scripted down to every word or evolved informally through centuries of oral tradition. The manuals of adab hint at structure, but much of what happened in noble houses flowed with the tides of power, gossip, and personality. Your host leans forward. You do understand, he says, that what you say in this courtyard travels faster than any horse. You freeze for half a second, not from fear, but from the knowledge that you are now inside the web. He smiles faintly. It's not unkind. A new servant appears, this one older, with a tray of perfumed water in brass bowls. Ritual hand cleansing. Before the next course, you assume. But it's more than that. The water carries orange blossom, a scent chosen not just for comfort, but for clarity. Some even believed it sharpened thought, eased suspicion. You rinse your fingers, slowly aware that Nothing you do is private here, not even your hands. Then the noble speaks again softly. There are guests who fill the air with words, and there are guests who leave room for meaning. I prefer the latter, another test passed, or just a reminder that you're being measured. You wonder how many people came here thinking themselves clever, only to be dismantled by this calm storm of decorum. Still, you remain composed. You've learned something vital. Persian etiquette was less about manners and more about orchestration. Every sound scent, silence, and sweetness placed precisely to see how you move through it. And for now, you are still dancing in step. The fig's syrup still lingers on your tongue, and the air smells faintly of orange blossoms and polished wood. Your host leans back again, shifting the dynamic as easily as one might rearrange cushions. You've spoken. Now it's his turn to reveal something or not. He gestures, and the boy returns with a small rolled carpet, clearly for you. You rise slightly as it's unfurled beside your bench. Sitting directly on stone would be unthinkable for a guest of standing. You lower yourself slowly, careful to show no awkwardness. Persian hospitality, after all, is layered with both comfort and quiet control. Then the noble speaks again. My grandfather used to say, he begins a man's worth can be seen by how he listens to his own silence. You nod, as if you too had heard such wisdom whispered in the corridors of your youth. Mainstream fact, in elite Persian households, conversation was often punctuated by poetry, not as entertainment, but as a measure of cultural refinement. It was expected that a well-bred guest could quote Ferdowsi Hafez or Saadi in response to a mood, a question, or even a raised eyebrow. The ability to do so without sounding rehearsed was a lifelong skill. Your host recites a verse. You recognize it vaguely, something about a tree whose roots are hidden, but whose shade gives comfort to all. He doesn't name the poet. He doesn't need to. You respond not with poetry, no, but with an anecdote about a tree in your father's garden that bore fruit only when no one watched it. He smiles. That was the right answer. Another gesture. This time a second servant appears with a glass bottle of rosewater and tiny silver spoons. One spoonful placed on the tongue to clear the senses and refresh the guest. You accept. The sweetness is floral, not cloying. Your palate sharpens somehow. Quirky tidbit. In some noble households, the precise ratio of rose to water in these concoctions was a family secret handed down like a military tactic. Recipes were adjusted by season, by humidity, by the mood of the day. The noble lifts a hand and the wind chimes outside the Iwan catch a breeze. A cascade of metallic pings, silver on brass. He closes his eyes briefly, as though letting his thoughts fall into rhythm with the chimes. Then he opens them. Do you believe he asks that men can be trained into virtue? Or must they be born with it? Philosophy. This isn't small talk. This is sparring. You think carefully. You speak slowly. You quote Sadi, carefully chosen, about how even the barren land, when loved and labored over, may grow a single rose. He nods, amused, perhaps even pleased. Historians still argue whether these conversations ever had correct answers, or if the real goal was to observe how the guest constructed their argument. One noble's wisdom could be another's folly, depending on what alliances hung in the air that day. You realize now that each interaction here, each sweet, each scent, each phrase, is a puzzle box. Every element of etiquette is a clue, a symbol, a test. It's exhausting, but exhilarating too. And yet you remain composed. Do you play chess? The noble asks suddenly. You nod. He smiles. Good, because you've just moved your queen into the open. You laugh softly, unsure if he's teasing or warning you. Probably both. A servant clears your teacup. The bench across from you is replaced with a small table, its legs carved in the shape of grapevines curling around lions. One of the legs is slightly uneven, a deliberate flaw, perhaps, a reminder of impermanence. Then your host says something strange. Now you must meet my cat. You blink. Quirky tidbit. In several Persian households, cats were not just pets, but indicators of character. A guest who was too eager, too dismissive, or visibly uncomfortable around the animal might be quietly blacklisted. The cat, of course, is not just any cat. She appears silently gliding like mist across the tiles. Her fur is long silver and sleek. She stops in front of you. You extend your fingers, not to touch, but to offer scent. She sniffs. She blinks. Then, with a flick of her tail, she curls up beside your rug. Your host watches this silently, then nods. She likes you. A strange sense of relief washes over you, and in that moment you realize this isn't about winning approval. It's about demonstrating fluency in stillness, in ritual, in restraint. Persian etiquette wasn't a mask. It was a language. And now you are speaking it. The cat purrs deep, slow, almost thunderous, and the noble takes this as a cue to shift gears. He rises, not fully just enough to signal transition, and steps aside to reveal a narrow doorway veiled with intricate bead curtains, the kind that shimmer like falling water. Without a word, he beckons you through. You stand careful not to disturb the cat, and follow him. The beads click softly as you pass like whispers, approving your passage. Now you're in a different space entirely. A narrow hallway, dimly lit by daylight filtering through colored glass windows. Camarilla, they're called. The floor tiles here are darker, cooler. You walk in silence, your host a few steps ahead. He does not glance back. You are expected to keep pace. Mainstream fact. Many noble Persian homes were constructed around a series of courtyards, each leading deeper into the private heart of the house. Guests were granted access only based on trust, rank, or purpose. The inner courtyard, the Anderun, was both the most sacred and the most socially complex. As you enter the second courtyard, the change is dramatic. It is quieter, more shaded, and oddly feminine. Not in a frilly way, no, but in its geometry, its softness, the way the vines are trained to curl around painted trellises, the scent of jasmine and ripe apricot, the absence of tension. The sound of water is softer here, the fountain smaller, more contemplative. You realize you've entered the realm where only a few guests go, a signal of trust or a trap. Historians still argue whether access to the Anderun for non-family members was a courtesy, a political maneuver, or a subtle form of vetting. Records mention merchants, poets, and physicians being granted temporary entry, never diplomats, rarely soldiers. Your host offers you a seat, this time a low stool next to a marble basin filled with rose petals. You can see your reflection rippling faintly. Your face looks calmer than you feel. A soft voice drifts in from the side. Would you like to wash? It's a woman. Not young, not old, draped in muted green. A servant, probably. She places a silver ewer beside the basin, bows slightly, and vanishes into the shadows. You dip your fingers, almost reverently. The water is cool and clean. You don't speak. Here the rules are even stricter. Then the noble returns. This time he's removed his outer robe. His shirt beneath is linen faintly embroidered at the cuff signs of wealth, made intentionally subtle. He sits on a cushioned ledge and gestures again. You've passed through 3 gates, he says. The outer world, the middle world, and now this one. You nod, not entirely sure what that means. But he continues. You've been honest, careful, and respectful of silence. These are good signs. You suppress a smile, so the game does have checkpoints. He claps his hands once. From a side passage comes a musician carrying a setar, a long-necked lute with a soft, melancholic voice. He does not speak. He simply begins to play. The notes are delicate, almost liquid. You find your breath slowing. Quirky tidbit. In elite homes, live music was sometimes used to observe the guest's reaction. Did they fidget? Did they cry? Did they close their eyes in genuine absorption or fake reverence? The noble might say nothing, but he noticed everything. The setar player shifts to a maqam, a modal scale often associated with longing. Your host watches you, eyes half-lidded, like someone listening for both melody and meaning. Then he asks a question that nearly derails you. If you could erase one memory from your life, he says softly, what would it be? Not the kind of thing you expect after jasmine tea. But this is the Anderun, the place where masks slip. You hesitate. You speak. You answer honestly. He nods, says nothing. But there's a pause now, a new texture in the silence, something less guarded. Historians still argue how much emotional vulnerability was permitted in these noble interactions. The etiquette manuals are silent on the matter, but poetry of the time is soaked in sorrow, in confession, in remembrance. Perhaps this was the only way it was allowed, encoded in metaphor, draped in protocol. The music ends. The noble stands, this time fully. Come, he says, it's time to eat. And with that you rise once more through another archway toward the place where food and favor intertwine. You follow him into a dining hall that doesn't immediately announce itself as such. It's long, rectangular, bordered by windows that filter light through panels of colored glass, casting shifting mosaics on the patterned floor. The scent changes subtly, sumac and saffron, now layered over with a buttery aroma that your stomach recognizes faster than your mind. You haven't eaten since that candied fig, and suddenly you are starving. The noble gestures to a low table, not more than a hand span above the floor, set with an embroidered cloth bearing patterns of pomegranates and deer. Around it cushions are placed, each arranged with an attention to posture hierarchy and comfort. You are guided to one. You do not sit until he does. He does not sit until the water is brought in. Two boys enter with pitchers of water and shallow copper basins. One washes the noble's hands, then yours. It's not for sanitation, it's for rhythm. The slow pouring, the scented water, the soft cloth, it lulls you into readiness, into calm. Mainstream fact. In Persian etiquette, washing before meals was ceremonial, often done with rose or orange blossom infused water. It marked not just cleanliness, but a transition from public to private, from conversation to communion. Only once this is complete does the food appear. Dishes begin to emerge, tahdig, the crisp rice crust that crackles audibly as it's lifted. Bowls of ash, reshteh, thick with noodles, greens and beans, koresht e fasanjan, a stew so dark it looks like ink, rich with walnuts and pomegranate molasses. Thin rounds of bread arrive wrapped in linen, still warm from the clay oven. You're not handed a plate. There is no plate. Instead, the noble gestures to the bread. Break what you need, he says. So you do, carefully. Not too large, not too small. He breaks his own dipsit into the stew and places it onto your side of the table, a silent offering. You return the gesture. It's not about feeding each other. It's about creating a rhythm of reciprocity, a shared tempo of trust. Persian dining, especially in elite homes, was not about nourishment alone. It was performance ritual and psychological alignment. Quirky tidbit. The specific placement of spices on the table, sumac, dried lime, saffron salt, sometimes served as a subtle commentary. Too much sumac beside a guest might imply that their presence needed brightening. A dish overly heavy with mint might hint at suppressed tension. You glance at your own spice pile balanced, a good sign. As you eat, your host speaks only a little. He tells a story about a merchant who once tried to buy an entire caravan of Persian rugs only to learn that one of them had a hidden insult woven into its pattern, a satire on the merchant himself. You both chuckle, but the message is clear. Beauty and venom sometimes share the same thread. Then he leans in slightly. You're wondering what all this means. You blink, nearly choking on a chickpea. He smiles. Everyone does. He pours more tea this time from a samovar, a tall ornate vessel with intricate bird engravings and a spout shaped like a lion's maw. The tea is darker now, stronger. You sip carefully. People think Persian etiquette is about rules, he says, but really, it's about reading. Not books, though, those help. Reading the air, the faces, the silences. You nod. It's starting to make sense. Some men, he continues, walk into a house and think it's all walls and cushions, but others feel the history in the tiles. They taste the memory in the soup. You swallow slowly. The soup does taste old, but in a good way, like it's been perfected through generations. Historians still argue whether these meals served political purposes, spiritual ones, or simply acted as canvases for cultural transmission. The food nourished, yes, but it also taught tested and transmitted values. The noble gestures toward a plate of herbs, basil, tarragon, mint. Take only the ones you know, he says cryptically. You reach for the mint. He watches you, then does the same. Good, he says. Too many herbs confuse the tongue. The meal slows. You realize the silence is deliberate now, not empty, but weighted. The final act of the meal isn't dessert, it's contemplation. Finally, a small bowl is placed before you, cholet zard, a saffron rice pudding topped with cinnamon designs, shaped like stars and fish, sweet floral grounding. You take a bite. You don't speak. And in that moment, you understand that Persian dining is not about being fed. It's about being initiated. The saffron still lingers on your tongue as you rise from the cushions. No words are exchanged. The meal has ended, not with a flourish, not with applause, but with stillness. The kind of stillness that invites reflection more than digestion. Your host leads you down a new corridor, narrower this time, with walls painted in faded florals. You recognize the gol-o-bol-bol motif, nightingales, and roses, the eternal Persian symbol of longing and poetic melancholy. The scent here is cooler, tinged with something medicinal, lavender, perhaps, or eucalyptus. It brushes your senses like a whisper through a curtain. Then you arrive at the study. If the courtyard was about welcome and the dining room about rhythm, this room is about memory. Scrolls and manuscripts line the shelves, some bound in lapis leather, others wrapped in silk. The floor is strewn with small rugs layered like memories, none dominating, each offering a different softness. A low desk stands at the center, flanked by cushions and a solitary oil lamp that flickers even in daylight. Mainstream fact: Persian nobles, particularly poets, physicians, and astronomers, often maintained private libraries that rivaled small mosques or madrasas. Books were signs of status, yes, but also of inner life. You were not considered fully educated until you had not only read, but copied, annotated, and debated. The noble walks to a shelf, removes a scroll, and offers it to you without explanation. You take it, carefully unroll it. The calligraphy is exquisite Nastaliq script, flowing and weightless. A poem by the look of it. You recognize a word, Ma, the moon. You scan the verse. It speaks of waiting by a garden wall for a lover who never came. Of shadows that grow softer the longer you watch them. You don't ask who wrote it. You already know. The noble sees your understanding and nods once. He places another scroll beside you. This one is different, less lyrical, more technical. Diagrams of canals, notes in the margins about irrigation, shadow angles, and root temperatures. You blink. It's a manual on garden architecture. Quirky tidbit. In many Persian households, gardens were engineered with near military precision, divided by cardinal directions, water flows, seasonal bloom patterns, and even acoustics. A whisper in one corner might travel across an entire parterre if designed just right. Historians debate whether this was pure function or poetic performance. The noble finally speaks. You've seen the outer garden. Now you'll understand why. He gestures to a third scroll. You're beginning to feel like a character in a mystic riddle. This one shows a layout your host's house, its 4 quadrants, its channels, its shaded arches. And then it hits you. This house is the garden. Not just surrounded by it, built like it. The Chahar Bagh model, the 4-part Persian garden, has been imposed not only on soil, but on structure. His home mimics the cosmos with the central courtyard as the axis mundi, the world's spiritual center. You feel yourself involuntarily relax, like a gear slotting into place. Historians still argue whether this architectural mimicry was symbolic religious or purely aesthetic. But for you in this moment, it simply feels true. The noble closes the scrolls. Words and water, he says, are the same thing in the right vessel. You nod. And again, he says nothing more. He moves to a small cabinet and draws out a vial, amber glass sealed with wax. He unplugs it and waves it toward you. A scent like myrrh and charred cedar fills the space. You feel your breath slow, not from sleepiness, but from recognition. This, he says, was buried in the courtyard wall 40 years ago. Still sharp, isn't it? You nod. He smiles faintly. Scent lasts longer than speech. That's why we perfume our libraries. Quirky as it sounds, he's not alone. Persian homes often kept scent vessels in libraries, not just to repel pests, but to create memory imprints. The theory: if you remember the scent, you remember the thought. You think of the jasmine, earlier, the fig, the tea. You realize your visit has been layered with olfactory cues, each space a fragrance, each phase a memory. The noble recorks the vial. He does not offer it to you. Some things stay. Then he gestures once more. You rise. You're not dizzy, but you do feel changed. Not quite a guest anymore, but not yet family. Not yet. The study releases you gently, as if reluctant to let go. You follow your host into a hallway that darkens slightly, lit now by high windows, stained amber and emerald, casting hues that feel like walking through honey and pine. A hush wraps around you, deeper than silence. It's the quiet of anticipation of nearing something private. Your sandals meet cool tiles, arranged in a dizzying geometric pattern, Giri designs, each interlocking star and polygon calculated to avoid repetition. Nothing here is random. Even the floor invites contemplation. He pauses before a wooden door plain, save for a single brass symbol at its center, a stylized tree with roots turning inward. He doesn't knock. The door opens with a creak that feels older than the house. And then you're inside the inner sanctum, the Andaruni, the hidden quarters. Mainstream fact. In traditional Persian homes, there was a strict division between the Biruni, outer public spaces for guests and formal affairs, and the Andaruni, private, often women-only quarters. The layout enforced privacy, modesty, and cultural boundaries, especially in elite households where hospitality coexisted with secrecy. You are technically not supposed to be here, but the noble seems unconcerned. Tonight, he says softly, there are no walls. The room is smaller than you expect, low-ceilinged, with arched alcoves filled with cushions, hand mirrors, and small clay lamps. The air is warmer here, denser, filled with the aroma of rose attar and sun-dried wool. A cat stretches on a windowsill, blinking slowly at you, entirely unimpressed by your presence. Women's laughter echoes from deeper within, light distant, like a memory from another house. But here, it's just the two of you again. He gestures to a tapestry that hangs across one wall. It depicts a garden, not lush and green, but silver-threaded and moonlit. The trees are upside down, their roots forming constellations. You stare at it, mesmerized. Dreams, he murmurs, always grow from the bottom up. Quirky tidbit. Persian homes often included dream alcoves, small cushioned nooks where one could lie facing north, head tilted just so, in hopes of invoking lucid dreams. Some even had dream-summoning inscriptions sewn into the pillows, invoking the protection of Khizr or Solomon. He taps the wall. A panel opens, no hinge, no seam, just a tilt. Behind it, another room. This one is circular. A single skylight above bathes the space in moonlight, striking a round pool at the center. The light reflects off the water and dances across the walls, which are painted with zodiac signs and birds in flight. The effect is surreal, dreamlike, like stepping into the mind of someone who doesn't fully believe in gravity. You lower yourself to the edge of the pool. The noble kneels beside you. Tell me, he says, do you see anything? At first, just your own reflection. Then, the moon. Then a flicker. The ceiling above the skylight has tiny holes cut into it. A star map, perhaps. Light filters through in exact alignment with constellations only visible in spring. Each season, he explains, has its own dreams. Historians still argue whether these rooms served ritual, psychological, or astrological functions. But you suspect the real answer is much simpler. They were for those who listened. He reaches into the water and pulls up a small copper disc. On it, a mirrored surface scratched with faint lines and crescent symbols. A dream recorder, he says, handing it to you. Not for writing, for remembering. You run your thumb across the surface. It's smooth, cool, utterly blank. Exactly, he says. That's why it works. He moves to one of the alcoves and removes a book bound in black felt, tied with a frayed ribbon. Inside, handwritten dreams, dozens of them. Some no longer than a sentence. I was a horse with no hooves, only mirrors. She served me tea that turned into coins. My garden sang when I watered it. Some are signed, some aren't. You close the book gently. Do you keep one, you ask? He smiles. Everyone does, but not all of us. Write it down. The cat yawns. The water ripples. A moth taps at the glass above, and then he says you've almost reached the center. You tilt your head. Haven't I already? He shakes his head. No, that was the breath. You wait. He continues. The center is where you forget you're awake. The pool stills again. The reflection returns. This time it isn't yours, but you don't flinch. You just watch. And in the hush of the Anderuni beneath stars that shouldn't be moving, you feel a softness enter your thoughts. Not confusion, just drift. The kind that gardens poems, and rooms like this were always meant to grow. The center is not marked by walls or doors. It is not a room with cushions, nor a garden with fountains. It's not even the pool you just sat beside. The center is an experience, an unraveling, and it happens the moment your body stays still, but your mind begins to drift in directions no architecture could contain. The noble rises quietly. His footsteps make no sound on the mosaic floor. You remain seated, eyes still fixed on the mirrored surface of the water, now so still it no longer reflects, but absorbs. It's not a trick of light. It's a trick of expectation. You expected to see yourself. But here in the center of the house, reflection behaves differently. He speaks from behind you. Now that you've seen the inner sky, it's time for the inner garden. You rise slowly. Every step feels padded, like the air is thicker here. A hallway curves gently. You pass beneath a pointed arch, painted deep blue, adorned with golden vines, and emerge into open air. Except it's not truly open. This is the Chahar Bagh. Mainstream fact. The Persians pioneered the concept of the Chahar Bagh, or four-part garden, in which an enclosed space is divided by two intersecting water channels. This design symbolizing the Quranic paradise spread as far as India and Spain, influencing Mughal and Moorish architecture alike. But this garden, is silent. No wind, no birds. The water does not burble, it hums. Each quadrant is planted differently, one with low herbs, another with vines that coil up golden lattices, a third with pomegranates, and the last with a single white cypress, its height absurd in such a confined space. You step along the channel's edge. The stone is cool, but not wet. The water runs just beneath it through glass-covered furrows. The noble gestures toward a stone bench. You sit. Each part of the garden, he says, nourishes a different part of the self. He doesn't explain further. He doesn't need to. The space does the explaining. The symmetry isn't cold. It's calming. The scent of basil and rosewater lingers faintly, as if held in place by some unseen hand. Quirky tidbit, some Persian gardeners swore by talking to their trees, believing each plant carried a soul that needed persuasion to bloom. There are even recorded poems addressed directly to mulberries and date palms, filled with coaxing scolding and praise. You glance at the white cypress. It's unmoved by your presence. The noble leans forward slightly. Now tell me what you see that doesn't belong. You scan the garden. Everything feels deliberate, ordered, but then you see it a single tile, just outside the pomegranate quadrant turned at a wrong angle. It breaks the otherwise perfect geometry. You point. He nods. Good. You're still awake. Historians still argue whether these deliberate imperfections were accidents or a spiritual gesture, a reminder that only the divine is perfect. In gardens, mimicking paradise a flaw might be the one honest thing. He stands, walks toward the tree, places one hand on its bark. You've come far, he says, but the question is why you don't answer. He turns gently amused. Don't worry. No one ever answers that right away. And then, would you like to meet the gardener? You blink. I thought you were. No, he says firmly. I'm just the host. He gestures toward the far wall where an opening appears. No hinges, no handle. Just absence, where there had been wall. He steps aside. You hesitate, then step through. The hallway is narrower now. The walls are rougher, older. The scent changes, earthier. Figs, perhaps. Maybe even clay. You pass a shelf with glass jars, each containing something floating, a curl of bark, a pinch of dried moss, a closed tulip bulb wrapped in gold thread. Another turn. A door opens, and there, on a low stool, beneath a latticed window, is the gardener, a woman, old bent. Her hands stained with indigo and earth, her eyes sharp enough to prune you on sight. She doesn't rise. She just pats the stool beside her. You sit. She picks up a pot of soil and places it between you. And then, without a word, she hands you a single seed. You look at it. Small, black, featureless. She murmurs one sentence. Tell it something worth growing for. You hesitate, then whisper a word. She nods, buries it, covers it with a flat palm, and says nothing else. You stay there for a long time listening to the nothing that follows. And in that silence a kind of answer forms, not loud, not certain, but present. You look up. The gardener is gone, but the door is open again, and the garden waits. You step back into the garden, and it somehow feels different, like it's heard what you whispered to the seed and decided you're no longer a stranger. The light has shifted. The shadows of the vine lattices have moved slightly across the marble channels. You pause beside the cypress tree and notice something that wasn't there before, a tiny shoot, barely more than a green pinprick poking out of the soil near its base. The gardener didn't lie. You walk slowly now. No one urges you forward. You're expected to navigate by instinct. At the far end of the courtyard, a narrow passage opens into a kitchen courtyard, which smells like roasted walnuts and turmeric. A servant walks by with a brass tray piled high with sticky sweets, sohan laced with saffron, and jewel-like cubes of baklava. He doesn't acknowledge you, but you hear the clink of glass cups being set somewhere just ahead. Mainstream fact. Persian hospitality placed enormous emphasis on food as ritual, not merely a display of wealth, but a language of intention. The number of dishes served, the sequence of sweets, even the placement of herbs, like mint or tarragon, could send a message. You round the corner, and there it is, the sofra. A wide tablecloth spread directly on the ground, adorned with small bowls and silver spoons. On it, dried fruits, white cheese, fresh herbs, salted cucumbers, almonds, warm bread, still puffed from the clay oven. No plates. You sit cross-legged, as everyone else already has. The noble is here again. How he arrived before you, you don't know, but he's chatting softly with a man whose beard nearly reaches the tablecloth. There's also a woman older, with a braid so long it loops once around her shoulder. They both glance at you, but say nothing. There's no talking during the first few bites. You mimic their movements. Pinch a piece of flatbread, scoop some cheese, layer it with mint and a single walnut. The textures are oddly perfect. The salt, the crunch, the cream. Then a hand offers you a tiny glass of tea, the amber kind too hot to hold comfortably, with a single sugar crystal resting beside it like a dare. You accept. A soft joke is made about your posture, something about a visitor from the north who folds their legs like a camel, but it's meant warmly. Quirky tidbit. In elite Persian homes, teasing the guest gently was a sign of inclusion, but no one would dare mock your shoes. Those remained sacred as they held the dust of where you came from. Suddenly the noble lifts his glass. A toast, he says to whoever planted the olive tree on the edge of the orchard, though no one remembers their name. Everyone drinks. And now conversation flows. They ask you absurd questions. If you could swap places with a cloud, Which cloud, if bread could speak, what accent would it have? What's the only lie you've ever told a plant? You answer, not because you know, but because the game demands it. Historians still argue whether these mealtime riddles were spontaneous symbolic or a form of social filtering, a way to probe wit values and boundaries without outright interrogation. Then, the woman with the braid tells a story about a grapevine planted on a family tomb, how it refused to grow toward the sun, curling instead around the stone, as if mourning in spirals. No one speaks for a long moment. Then someone changes the subject, but the taste of that story lingers like pomegranate molasses on your tongue. The meal ends not with a grand finale, but with a gentle release. A bell chimes once. The noble nods. And suddenly you're being led away not by him, but by a child. Maybe 8 years old, barefoot, carrying a basket of figs. She doesn't speak. You follow. Through another archway across a courtyard that's clearly for animals, doves coo softly in a copper cage, and finally into a room with walls made entirely of books. Floor to ceiling, no windows. Just lanterns and the scent of parchment and cedar. She sets down the basket, selects a book, hands it to you. It's bound in blue leather, the title written in gold script so fine it looks hand-threaded. You open it. The pages are blank. You look up. She shrugs. Maybe it's waiting for your story, and she walks away. You sit there a long time, unsure whether to laugh or write or sleep. Maybe all three. The room has no clock, no hour, no ceiling you can measure. It's just the library of whatever you've just become. Outside, the sky is darkening. Even the garden has begun to quiet. And you wonder, was this a visit or an invitation? It's sometime between candle hour and moonrise now, and the silence has changed its shape. It no longer waits politely at the edges of your awareness. It wraps around you like a cloak, heavy and embroidered with the day's sensations. Fragrance, texture, laughter, soil. You rise slowly from the floor of the library, the blank book still in your hand, and begin to walk without direction. The fig basket sits untouched on a low table. You pluck one fruit, its skin slightly wrinkled sugar beginning to bloom and bite. The sweetness is not immediate. It builds, like most things here. You pass through an arched passage framed with climbing ivy and emerge into what feels like a transition space, not quite a room, not quite a courtyard. There are low stone benches, a burbling fountain no higher than your ankles, and walls lined with tiles that reflect starlight like shallow pools. You don't recognize this part of the house, which is odd, because you were almost certain you'd seen it all. Mainstream fact. Persian noble homes, especially in desert regions, often included hidden or shifting rooms, interior sanctuaries designed for temperature control and psychological retreat. These included summer alcoves, tak, and subterranean chambers, sardab, to escape the day's heat. You lower yourself onto a bench beside the fountain, the sound of water drawing a line through your fatigue. Then you notice the wall ahead. It's not solid. It's a mashrabiyah, a wooden lattice screen carved with repeating geometric patterns. And behind it, movement. You lean closer. Voices filter through soft, layered, like songs, sung into a jar and sealed. This is a women's space. You can't see them, and they cannot see you. But their presence is unmistakable. You hear laughter, then the delicate splash of water into a basin. Someone hums a lullaby you don't know, but your body recognizes it anyway. Quirky tidbit. In elite Persian homes, women's quarters were often not just secluded, but beautifully adorned with mirrored walls, fountains, and perfumed air. Far from being neglected, these were considered the soul of the household. Some men designed their homes around the women's sanctuary, not the other way around. You look away, not out of shame, but reverence. The garden behind you rustles, even without wind. A few petals drift silently down from a pomegranate tree. One lands in your lap, and you let it stay. Then, from the side, a figure approaches. Not the noble this time. A servant, a guest. Their robe is simple, but the confidence in their walk suggests they belong here more than you. They sit beside you without greeting. After a pause, they ask, "Have you seen the wind?" "Well yet." You frown. "You would have felt it earlier," they explain. "That breeze in the tea room, it wasn't a coincidence." They rise and beckon. You follow again through a narrow stairwell carved from pale stone, the temperature dropping with each step. Eventually, the air becomes startlingly cool, crisp, like the hour just before sunrise. And then you see it, a badger, a traditional Persian wind catcher. A vertical shaft rises through the building with angled slats that funnel air downward. At its base is a small pool of water, its surface trembling from the airflow. Mainstream fact: Persian engineers designed wind catchers as natural air conditioners, channeling even the faintest breeze into subterranean spaces where it was cooled by water, then rising again to ventilate the upper rooms. These designs often predated similar concepts in Europe by centuries. You lean into the shaft. The air brushes your cheek like a sigh. "It's alive," the stranger says. "That's why we call it the garden's breath." Historians still argue whether these systems were purely practical or part of a deeper cosmic symbolism, a built environment that mimicked the respiration of the earth itself. You ask the stranger how the noble maintains all of this. "The garden keeps itself," they say. The house just listens. Before you can respond, they hand you a single tile blue with a silver iris at its center. "This fell from the ceiling in the winter chamber," they say. "We never found where it belonged." Maybe it's meant for you. You tuck it into your pocket, not because it means anything, yet. You exit the wind room, and the stranger is already gone. Outside, the stars have multiplied. The fig in your belly feels like a heartbeat. And once again you are walking, not toward anything, but within something. The house, it seems, still has stories to tell. You move slowly now, like someone returning through a dream, retracing, not footsteps, but sensations, the cool of tile underfoot, the warmth of filtered light, on skin the sharp, sweet sting of jasmine, carried by wind, not your own. The house, or rather the paradise within the house, feels different now, not larger, just deeper, like it was waiting for you to learn how to listen. You find yourself once again in the main courtyard where it all began. But the light has changed. Moonlight now pools in the fountain's basin, painting silver veins across the water's ripples. Somewhere, a lute is being plucked, the notes too slow to form a song, more like a conversation with silence. You sit by the pond, eyes catching your reflection, distorted, almost ornamental, like one of those painted miniatures on parchment where no one is quite real, but everything is true. Your own face seems less defined, more absorbed into the place. Mainstream fact. In many Persian traditions, water wasn't just decorative, it was sacred and psychological. Pools and channels reflected the sky, doubling the heavens below. Gardens were laid out to represent the cosmos, with the central fountain symbolizing the source of life. You trail your fingers across the surface. A small moth skims the water, daring fate. You blow gently, and it lifts off like a paper promise. The door behind you opens. You turn. It's the noble again. No scrolls this time. No speech. He approaches and sits beside you, saying nothing for a while. Then, with a glance toward the pond, he murmurs, "Did you notice the stars are all upside down in the water?" You nod. He chuckles. That's the trick of paradise. You think it's a destination, but it's just a reflection of where you already are. The two of you sit in silence. For once, the silence isn't asking anything of you. Then he leans forward and lifts something from the edge of the fountain, a small clay jar, round, unmarked. This, he says, is the last thing planted in every garden. He opens it. Inside, ashes. You blink. Quirky tidbit. In some Persian households, a tiny urn of ashes, usually from sacred incense or ceremonial fires, was buried beneath the roots of the oldest tree in the garden. It was said to represent the return of speech to silence, and served as a symbolic reminder that even paradise is finite. It reminds us, the noble says softly, to enjoy what grows while it grows. Even paradise wilts, especially paradise. You nod again. Historians still argue whether this ash tradition was widespread or regional, whether it symbolized mourning or rebirth. But sitting here with your hand hovering above the water's mirror, the meaning feels obvious, not scholarly, but intimate, not symbolic, but lived. You ask the noble if he ever leaves this place. Sometimes he shrugs, but the garden always comes with me. He rises again, as though summoned by the architecture. You follow him one last time. not because you must, but because the garden has become a rhythm, and your body now knows the steps. You pass under a trellis tangled with night-blooming vines. The moon backlights each petal, making them seem translucent, ghostly, but alive. And then you reach a small door, plain wood, half your height. The noble pushes it open. Inside a single empty room. No cushions, no scrolls, no fountains. Just a square of moonlight on a clay floor and a shovel leaning in the corner. He looks at you, deadpan. This is where I bury the visitors who ask too many questions. You raise an eyebrow. He grins. Kidding. Mostly. You both laugh, the kind of tired laugh that seals something unspoken. Then he adds, "This room is for new beginnings, but only when you've earned them." You take one step inside. The shovel does not move. You don't need to dig anything. You just need to stand still. The garden breathes around you, and now you realize, so do you. You step back out from the bare room, that quiet joke still lingering like incense, faint but persistent. Your feet return to the garden path, not by choice but by invitation, silent and aromatic, as if the stones themselves were whispering, "Not yet." It's darker now, the kind of darkness that isn't empty but textured, stitched with chirps, rustles, and faint footsteps that may or may not be your own. You pause at a fork in the path. One route veers toward the herb gardens, again, the other toward the orchard, where figs once fell into your palm unasked. You choose neither. You simply sit, right there on the stone between paths. The night doesn't mind. A soft scrape behind you. Then the noble returns, but not alone. Another figure accompanies him. An older woman, perhaps a healer, her hands stained with what looks like crushed saffron and walnut husk. Her presence quiets even the noble, which says something. She carries a small basket with tiny clay tiles, each painted with a single letter. Letters you don't recognize. Mainstream fact. In some Persian households, particularly those influenced by Sufi, thought the garden was used as a place of divination, not through stars, but through tiles, scent, and direction of plant growth. Questions were asked aloud, then interpreted based on patterns formed by thrown objects or flower behavior. The woman kneels in front of you without a word, spreads the tiles like a child playing jacks, and gestures for you to pick 3. You do. She turns them over. One bears a sun, one a well, and one a broken sandal. She smiles, though not at you, at the moon. She murmurs something to the noble in a dialect you don't recognize. He nods. She says your path is below you now. You blink. What does that mean? She says you're no longer a guest here. You stare at the tiles again. The sun seems to glow slightly. The well shimmers with painted blue. And the sandal. It's cracked right through the heel. Quirky tidbit. According to fringe beliefs, recorded in a 10th century Persian treatise on garden magic, yes, that was a thing. Broken sandals in dreams, or divination rituals, meant the soul is now barefoot in paradise, a signal that you've passed through without needing to return. Or more playfully, that you'd worn out your welcome. Interpretations varied wildly. You thank the woman who has already begun gathering her tiles with the speed and precision of someone who's done this 1,000 times. As she departs, she tosses you something, a single seed. Historians still argue whether this practice giving visitors a seed from the garden upon departure was symbolic or pragmatic. Some say it represented transference, carrying the paradise within you. Others argue it was just a very charming way to spread plant varieties. The noble shrugs. Could be a pomegranate, could be a weed. That's the fun part. You tuck it into your pocket next to the fallen tile from earlier. Now you have a tiny collection, memories you can touch. You stand and feel the soft shift in gravity, not tired exactly, but ready and the noble. He places a hand on your shoulder. There's one last thing you should see. You let him guide you again, this time past the orchard and the old wall where vines bloom even without soil. You pass a gate you never noticed before, covered in iron filigree, shaped like birds, mid-flight. He opens it, beyond nothing, or so it seems. An open field, moonlit and barren, with only one thing planted in the center, a single cypress tree, tall, unbending, still. Mainstream fact. In Persian symbolism, the cypress represents immortality and resilience. It never bends in storm, never sheds in drought. Some royal gardens planted a lone cypress to remind visitors that true paradise is not comfort, but clarity. You walk toward it. The soil crunches slightly beneath your feet, dry, but not lifeless. You circle the tree once, and for the first time tonight, no one follows you. You're alone, and it feels perfect. You place your hand on the trunk. The bark is warm, and for a moment, nothing happens, and that is everything. You don't know how long you stand there, hand against the cypress trunk, but time no longer functions the same way. It stretches, it folds, it exhales. You close your eyes and breathe in the scent of the bark, peppery, resinous, ancient, and feel the way it anchors the silence around you. The tree doesn't speak, of course. It doesn't need to. Its very stillness is a statement. You imagine roots threading down through centuries of soil, wrapping around forgotten artifacts, old clay water jars, the rusted remains of a gardener's trowel, and you realize this is the heart of the garden, not the fountain, not the tiles, not even the perfumed herbs. This tree is what everything else breathes from. Mainstream fact. Persian gardens often featured a central tree carefully chosen and deliberately placed to mark the axis of design. In many cases, this was a cypress or a fruiting tree that symbolized eternity or abundance. This concept came from Zoroastrian cosmology, where the tree of all seeds was said to stand at the world's center. You open your eyes. The noble is gone now. Not vanished, just respectfully absent. The garden knows when to step back. The wind picks up subtle, but firm. A few pine-like needles drift down and land on your shoulders like soft epaulets. You let them stay. Then, off in the distance, you hear it again, a shovel against dirt. But you're not alarmed. You know by now that every sound here is both metaphor and memory. You follow the sound. It leads you past the olive grove and back to the servants' gate, where the gardener you saw earlier, yes, the same one still humming, still slightly off-key, is digging a neat trench beside a wall of climbing roses. He pauses, leans on his shovel, and smiles. Planting light bulbs, he says, deadpan. You raise an eyebrow. He gestures at a crate filled with small round bulbs. Onions, maybe. Tulips. Impossible to tell in this light. Quirky tidbit. Historical records show that Persian horticulturists would bury bulbs at night to avoid sun damage to the roots and to prevent pests from watching and returning later. Some believed planting in moonlight imbued the flowers with cooler, calmer personalities, like training them to be better citizens of the garden. He kneels and gently places a bulb into the trench, then another, then another. You kneel beside him, uninvited, but unbothered. He hands you one. You plant it. And for a moment, the world feels exactly right-sized. Not too large, not too mysterious, just knowable. He leans back, wiping his forehead with a cloth. Funny thing about these gardens, he says, is people always think they're for the living. You wait. He grins. But sometimes the dead visit too. You flinch just slightly. He laughs. No, not like that. I mean, people come back here in dreams, in memories, in smells. These walls remember better than people do. Historians still argue whether certain Persian garden layouts were deliberately constructed as mnemonic devices with specific plantings used to evoke particular memories or teachings. Some believe Sufi mystics even used the gardens to walk through spiritual metaphors, each quadrant representing a stage of enlightenment. You glance around again. The symmetry, the repeated colors, the gradual transitions from fragrant to quiet. It all makes sense now. The garden isn't a place. It's a sequence. And you've nearly reached the end. The gardener pats the soil over the last bulb, hums a bar of an old tune, then stands. Time to go, he says, not unkindly. You rise. The garden is darker now, not empty, just complete. As you pass beneath a vine-laced archway, you spot something that wasn't there before, a small plaque affixed to the stone. You lean close to read it. Etched in fading Persian script, paradise is not a place you visit. It is the moment you understand you never left. You smile, tracing the carved words with your fingertips. And for the first time all night, you know the way out. But you don't rush. You walk slowly. The garden deserves a proper goodbye. Your steps retrace no path you remember, yet nothing feels unfamiliar. It's as if the garden rearranges itself as you move just enough to keep the illusion that you're discovering something new even though it's been waiting for you all along. Past the cypress, past the bulb, rose, past the gate of silent birds, you arrive at a long shaded corridor of planted shadows. Overhead woven grapevines form a living canopy, dappling moonlight onto the worn stone tiles like scattered notes of an unfinished lullaby. To your left, small alcoves carved into the garden walls, each housing simple urns, brass censers, or tiny figurines, some of birds, others of abstract swirling shapes. They are not labeled, they are not explained, and yet you understand. Mainstream fact. In many Persian gardens, especially those tied to elite households or Sufi retreats, small devotional spaces were built into the walls. These niches served as reminders of contemplation, not necessarily religious, but spiritual. You were not meant to worship in them. You were meant to pause. So, you pause. In one alcove, a single pomegranate sits ripening in a shallow bowl of water. It glows like a heart. You almost reach for it, but instead you sit. The vines above creak gently in the wind. A cat pads silently across the path and disappears behind a fig tree. It doesn't look back. You kind of wish it had. The longer you sit, the more you hear. Not just the wind or leaves, but layers. Water trickling bees drowsy in distant hives. Footsteps that aren't yours. Laughter that ended centuries ago, but still echoes when the night is just right. Quirky tidbit Persian folklore claims that gardens could record moments. The idea was not supernatural, but poetic. If you laughed near a rose bush often enough, the roses would bloom sweeter next season. There's no science to it, but your nose wouldn't argue. You rise again. The corridor opens onto a narrow mirror pool, a long rectangular basin flanked by torches, now burned low. The water is still, perfectly still. It reflects not just the sky, but the shape of the garden itself, revealing patterns too large to notice from within. You lean over, and there you are, but not as you expected. In the reflection, you're dressed like a Persian noble, robes embroidered with symbols you recognize only from tiles, with a small ring on your finger in the shape of a cypress. You blink. Still there. Historians still argue whether mirror pools in Persian gardens were meant for reflection in the literal or metaphorical sense. Some say they were purely decorative. Others insist they were tools, invitations to see yourself as the garden sees you. You reach into your pocket, pull out the seed the old woman gave you. You drop it into the pool. It sinks. Ripples bloom outward, breaking the illusion. The reflection dissolves. The water clears. Nothing changes. Everything changes. You step back. The final gate is ahead now. You know it even though it looks like all the others, an arch of stone laced with jasmine barely wide enough for two people to walk side by side. You hesitate. And then, to your surprise, Someone appears beside you, the noble gnome, the gardener. Not this time, it's you, or someone like you. They wear your face, but slightly older, calmer. They smile, not as a greeting, but as a mirror. You walk side by side, saying nothing, because nothing needs to be said. Together, you step through the final gate, and on the other side, no fireworks, no revelations, just a bench, and a breeze, and a view of the garden from outside where it looks smaller, quieter, almost make-believe. You sit, and the other you, they vanish. No drama, no smoke, just gone. You don't panic. You don't even flinch. Because for the first time all night you realize you're not in the garden anymore. You are the garden. You remain seated on the stone bench, the garden now behind you, tucked within its walls, like a secret. The air is lighter out here, touched by open sky and the faint scent of wild herbs carried from the hills beyond. The stars, no longer framed by trellises or columns, sprawl across the night like an overturned chest of silver coins. But something keeps your gaze low. There in front of you lies a dry field, cracked soil, struggling grass, a donkey tied lazily to a pegtail, twitching in rhythmic irritation. It's not the lush paradise of earlier, but it's real, gritty, honest. And suddenly, you understand why the garden mattered so much. Mainstream fact, the Persian Chahar Bagh 4-part garden was never meant to be purely ornamental. It was a deliberate contrast to the arid environment outside. By creating order, water, and shade, the garden became not only a physical sanctuary, but also a spiritual rebellion against chaos and drought. A claim that paradise was possible, even in defiance of geography. You rise from the bench, dust your palms, and, for some reason, instinct, maybe you begin to walk across the dry field. The dust clings to your shoes, then your ankles. Your breath picks up. The soil is uneven, peppered with thorny brush and roots that don't care who walks overhead. There are no tiles here, no perfumed breezes, just real heat and old earth. But then your foot strikes something, a clink. You kneel and brush away the dirt. A small ceramic pipe, broken but unmistakably artificial, runs just beneath the surface. You trace its direction and find another, and another. Quirky tidbit archaeological surveys have uncovered long-forgotten irrigation systems buried far outside the boundaries of known gardens, test beds for future plantings, or abandoned projects where the gardener's dream died before the plants could take root. You follow the pipe trail, piecing together its skeleton like some dusty archaeologist of hope. And then you reach it. A circle of bare stones arranged deliberately with a central drain and 4 shallow grooves branching outward like compass points. This was going to be a garden. Someone tried. Someone dug, dreamed, planned. Historians still argue whether failed gardens should be studied with the same reverence as successful ones. Some scholars claim they offer more insight, revealing ambitions, constraints, and climate battles in ways a perfect Chahar bog never could. Others say the beauty of Persian garden design lies in its execution, not its potential. You're not sure which side you agree with, but you kneel again, and without knowing why, you press your palm into the dry center of that stone ring. A warmth surprises you, not from the earth, but from within. The warmth of effort, of someone who tried and didn't finish, but tried nonetheless. You rise slowly, brush off your knees, and begin to walk back, not to the garden, not to the bench, but somewhere else entirely. The night is older now. You feel it in your bones. A sense of closure that doesn't ask for ceremony. You pass the donkey again. It watches you with lazy suspicion. You tip an invisible hat. The wind shifts, and ahead, beyond a ridge, you see something faint aglow. Not fire, not lanterns, something subtler, like moonlight hitting water. You know better than to assume it's another garden, but you head toward it anyway, because this journey was never really about staying in paradise. It was about learning how to walk toward it again and again, even through dust. The glow ahead flickers gently as you make your way across the uneven path. You begin to hear something soft, faint splashes, like a child kicking their feet in a shallow stream, too far to see, but near enough to imagine. You crest the low ridge and stop. It's not a garden, not really. It's a field of runoff pools, irregular, murky, scattered among reeds and low stone dividers. Nothing grand, no symmetry, no fragrant pathways, just collected water, the kind that stubbornly refuses to vanish even when the earth forgets to rain. But someone has been here. Footprints, scraped stone, a leaning tin bucket, and a small pile of seeds wrapped carefully in cloth. You kneel beside the water's edge, dipping your fingers into the cool surface. A toad blinks from the shade of a reed, unimpressed. Dragonflies hover like tiny helicopters, wings whirring so fast they hum. Mainstream fact: in arid zones beyond major cities, Persian farmers and village gardeners often relied on Qanat runoff pools, the last stop in a long irrigation chain. These pools weren't aesthetic masterpieces, but functional micro-gardens, sometimes sprouting wild mint reeds and barley. They were used for washing, watering, and on hot days just sitting and breathing. You sit, because what else is there to do? The mud is warm beneath you. The breeze carries no perfume, but it's kind. And then you spot it, a single iris, purple and defiant, blooming just at the pool's edge. It's crooked, a little lopsided, but thriving. Quirky tidbit. Folk tales from rural Persia often claim that if a single iris blooms unasked at the edge of a water pool, it means the land still remembers the hands that once tended it. It's not a superstition. It's a thank you note from the soil. You reach for the bucket. It's heavier than it looks, still half filled from someone's last chore. You lift it, walk slowly to a dry patch nearby, and pour just a bit. Then another, until the bucket is empty. Historians still argue whether the earliest gardens grew from personal effort or state-sponsored projects. Some insist the grand gardens were funded and directed by kings. Others argue the idea of paradise started small, with villagers, mothers, hermits, travelers, people who just couldn't bear to let the earth go barren. You look down at the wet patch you've made. No seeds yet, no roots, but something has shifted. You can feel it. You stand again. The moon has shifted too, higher now, more silver than before. And far behind you, though, you don't turn to check, you sense the garden, not as a place, but as a memory, grafted to your limbs. In the way you now notice shade, in the way your fingers remember how to cup water, in how silence feels less lonely. You start walking again. You don't know the path, but your feet do. And in the hush of the desert night, as frogs begin their song and stars reassert their shimmer, you begin to hum softly, sleepily, the melody of the fountains, the rustling of pomegranate leaves, the whispered lessons of a gardener who never introduced himself. Because you know now, paradise was never meant to be visited. It was meant to be replanted, even here, especially here. Your steps carry you now, as if on memory alone. Not memory of this specific place, but of possibility. The desert is still a desert, dry and indifferent. But now you don't see barren land. You see blank canvas. You've wandered so far that the formal garden is a distant whisper. There are no walls here, no tiled walkways, only a long stretch of earth dotted with low shrubs, the occasional spindly tree, and stars that seem to lean in curious. You slow as you come upon a small circular platform barely raised from the sand, made of weather-worn stone etched with nearly invisible inscriptions. You run your hand over the faint carvings. They're not Persian. They're older. Cuneiform, maybe. Maybe just the marks of someone waiting to be remembered. Mainstream fact. Long before the Persian empires formalized garden design, older civilizations in the same region, Elamites, Medes, and even earlier peoples had rituals that tied land, water, and reverence for fertility into sacred shapes. They may not have built gardens as we know them, but they arranged stones, burned offerings, and carved prayers to call life out of dust. The platform feels cool. You sit, and for a long moment, you do nothing. A fly buzzes. Your breath steadies. The desert sounds like silence, but it's full of layered textures, a rustle, a chirp, the wind nudging grit across stone. And then you see something, not a vision, not a dream, but a memory you've inherited. You're standing again in the center of the Chahar Bagh, but it's no longer symmetrical. Its paths are uneven. The trees are wild. Some flowers have faded. The pool is cracked. But someone, maybe, you has returned with a bundle of tools, a small sack of seeds, a cracked jug of water. The garden doesn't need to be perfect, it needs to be maintained. Quirky tidbit medieval Persian poets often reference the garden not as a symbol of indulgence, but of responsibility. One popular verse compared the heart to a garden that with neglect becomes thorned, but with daily tending returns to bloom in spring. You open your eyes. You're still on the old platform. You lean back, the stone solid behind you, and look up. Historians still argue whether the metaphysical significance of gardens outweighed their political function. Were they built to impress ambassadors, symbolize divine order, or soothe the private souls of their creators? The answer is probably yes, to all of it, but perhaps especially the last. You lie back fully now, the stars shift, and somewhere within you a seed has taken root. It might be days or years before you return to the formal garden, before you dig or prune or water anything. But the truth is, you've already started. The shapes, the sounds, the patience, all of it has found a place within you. The desert hasn't changed, but you have. And that is how paradise begins. Not with the land, but with the eyes that look at it differently. You don't remember falling asleep on the stone, but you must have, because now the light has changed. Not brighter, just different. The kind of light that comes before sunrise, when the air is cold and the sky hasn't decided yet whether to stay dark or warm up. You stretch just a little, careful not to disturb the dust gathered on your clothes. And in that moment, it hits you. This journey you've taken through tunnels and palaces, over terraces, and across rivers wasn't about finding a single garden. It was about understanding what makes a space sacred, even when the land seems lifeless. You sit up slowly, eyes drawn to the faint outline of the horizon. In the far distance, just barely visible, is a flicker of green. Could be a mirage. Could be the first row of date palms marking the edge of another estate. Could be a new garden planted quietly by someone else who dared to believe. Mainstream fact: by the time of the late Safavid dynasty, Persian gardens had evolved into political theaters, pilgrimage destinations, and even spiritual retreats. Some were meticulously engineered. Others were spontaneous creations by rural mystics who aligned garden features with celestial movements, seeing each plot as a mirror of the cosmos. The tools of paradise weren't just trowels and seeds. They were attention time and the deep conviction that even hostile land responds to care. You brush your hands on your robes and begin to walk. No map this time, no path, just trust. The kind of trust ancient gardeners must have had when digging the first trench for a qanat, when choosing a single sapling for shade, when carving poetry into tiles that they knew might outlast them. Quirky tidbit: some garden walls in Persia had holes carved specifically to let small animals come and go, even if they disrupted the plants. The belief that a garden too perfect for wild things had forgotten its soul. Historians still argue whether the ultimate purpose of Persian gardens was political, religious, or purely aesthetic. But no one disputes how deeply the idea took root. not just in soil, but in the collective Persian imagination. Garden metaphors appear in love poetry, death rituals, legal texts, even in lullabies. And speaking of lullabies, it's time now to lie down one last time in this imagined soil, not to build, not to water, but simply to rest. Let's ease out of this dream together. You close your eyes again, and this time there's no need to follow paths or prune trees or name flower species. All that noise can fall away now. Feel the cool weight of night still lingering in the air, soft as a cotton shawl. Let your breath slow, sinking in rhythm with the imagined pulse of a garden gone still for the night. There are no chores left to do, no guests to entertain, just you and the soft echo of flowing water somewhere deep underground, still moving, still nourishing, quiet but present. You can hear it, can't you? A ripple beneath the earth, the memory of a fountain, even when dry. Let that sound carry you gently deeper into stillness. You don't need a palace. You don't need symmetry. You don't need perfection. You are already the garden and the gardener, the water and the one who thirsts, the wall and the vine that climbs it. You are the hush before sunrise, the root that sleeps through winter, the flower that blooms when no one is watching. Let the last light fade behind your eyes now. Let the story of the earth fold you into its slow, patient turning. And if you dream tonight, may it be of things growing softly, quietly, without end. Sleep well, wanderer of paradise.